groundbreaking field, the future of the youth. It is titled The Plans and Future Visions of Young People in an Era of Uncertainty, analyzing aspirations and future trajectories amidst global challenges. Our first presenter in this panel is Miley Kang, who is pursuing a PhD in Education Sciences at the University of Debrecen, originally from Cambodia. Please, the stage is yours.
All right, first I would like to say good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here and thank you for the introductions. So it's the last sessions and it's also late afternoon, but I hope that you are still with me. So I would like to start now. My topic today, it's not too different from the previous presentation, but yes, it's still different. So it's what I'm going to focus on today is the digital echoes, youth anxiety, and the paradoxes of online connections. So what comes to your mind when you see online connection? So of course, maybe messaging apps, video conferencing tools, but I believe that what comes first to your mind is social media platforms, which is getting widespread and not just after pandemic, but it's been a long time even before the pandemic time. So this is what I'm going to focus on today, not on other messaging apps or video conferencing tools, but the main focus is on social media platforms. So actually, it's the word connection itself, it's quite ambiguous because the question is, in online connections, do youth feel really connected in online connection or not? And we are going to seek for the answers in my ongoing research on online connections and youth pressures and stress during this era. But before that, I would just like walk you through the different studies on today's youth in the 21st century and how they navigate their identity through social media platforms. So in Vogel's studies in 2022, 95% of US teens have access to a smartphone, 97% of them use the internet daily, and 46% report being online almost constantly. But the problem is that not only American teens, but all over the world, that teens started to be constantly online and using different platforms. And the most used platforms include YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat, that they spend hours scrolling and a lot of time wasted on social media. And interestingly, that girls, female teens, they are more likely to report negative effects of social media, but for male teens, they see social media in a positive way or neutral outcomes of using social media. The ironic part of the social media is that youth are engaging online, they seek for connections and the sense of belonging, but at the same time, they report stress, pressure to maintain image and burnout from using a lot of social media. There's connections between higher social media use and the report of feeling social isolation. So we use social media to feel connected, but on the flip side, that social media can make a lot of teens feel socially isolated and disconnected from the real world. So the word connected, like I mentioned earlier, it's quite ambiguous because you say that teens nowadays, they are connected digitally, but at the same time, they are disconnected from real life situations because focusing in the content in social medias and getting concentrated on what's going on with other people's lives, sometimes you lose connections with your own life. The interesting phrase used in Primark and colleagues study in 2017 is FOMO. I'm not sure whether you've come across this before or not, but FOMO is the shortcut for fear of missing out. And fear of missing out, it's a widespread disease. Maybe compared to COVID-19, it's not that serious, but it's mentally and psychologically FOMO. It's killing, or maybe it's making your mental health getting weaker and weaker. And exposure to unrealistic portrayal of others' lives. One example is that one morning I was teaching a critical thinking class at my university, and I was chit-chatting with my students, and they came to me, and I just asked, how are you? How was your night? Did you sleep well? And they just suddenly they said that we shouldn't have slept last night. I asked, so what's the reason? Because in the middle of the night, they said, two influencers, they were having a big argument live online in Facebook. And they said that we were sleeping and now we feel like we are running behind the world. But actually, this is just one example of FOMO, but there are so many more that you can see in real life situations that fear of missing out make people stay constantly online because you don't want to miss out on updates and news. And the first point of my presentation is paradox of digital socialization. Actually, there are so many types of socializations, but I focused on the digitalization today because that teens use social media again. I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the presentation that because they want to connect and express themselves and feel part of a community. But these same platforms are like double-sided knife or double-sided sword because it reinforces the pursuits of likes. So instead of just feel connected, so teens post certain images or contents and keep scrolling and refreshing to see how many likes and comments they get from time to time. And they seek for approval. So every single thing that they do on the social media platform is for visibility and to see whether people approve their content or not. And this lead to heightened self-consciousness and also reduced well-being of teens in the 21st century. And the gap is getting bigger between authentic self and the way that they try to curate online persona so that they can distort their identity. So they try to shape their identity to meet the needs of the society and the followers instead of following their own intrinsic motivations. And the more you've relied on social media for validations and the greater they reported emotional breakdown and self-worth instability, because self-worth depends more on the approval from other people, external validation, so it's not stable in this sense. And compulsive engagement and doom scrolling, when you see the word doom, it's already sends negative vibe and negative energy. But doom scrolling here, it's an interesting term, and especially it's used a lot during COVID-19 pandemic, especially in crisis events. So normally during crisis events, psychologically, we seek to catch up with the updates. But in crisis events, instead of looking for positive news, we instinctively look for the negative news, link and connect to each other, and this leads to fatigue and exhaustions at the end of the day. So doom scrolling, it's not a good side of social media use, but actually it leads to sense of helplessness and the mental breakdown at the end of the day. And users engage compulsively to stay informed. They end up feel overwhelmed and mentally exhausted because of the over-informations of the negative news. Algorithmic echo and chambers. I believe that you are familiar with the terms algorithms because maybe it happened to you that 2 minutes ago you were searching for shoes to wear for the party in the evening, but 2 minutes later you see advertisement on the Facebook about shoes. It's kind of scary, but what is scarier is that people keep doing it, keep feeding algorithmic mechanism. Like the Facebook, if you keep looking for the same thing, it feeds you the same content. And later on, you will be limited from diverse viewpoints in the world because you keep seeing the same category, the same content from time to time. And it reinforces ideological echo chambers because you keep seeing the same content. And especially the teenage users, they engage with the content which align their existing belief, their ideology. So if they see something which is not agreeing with their existing belief, they tend to just dismiss the informations. And this leads to the radicalizations of ideas. And it's not just political views, but seriously, it's getting distorting the identity, gender, sexuality, and body image. So teens start to feel like this is the way I should show the world. So it increased internal conflict. Maybe this is not what I want, but this is what people want to see in social media. So they are pressured to perform in a way that is misaligned with their internal motivations. And all of this, the points that I mentioned earlier, lead to digital dependency and relationships. So in Turco's ethnographic research, it's digital devices mediate youth communications. It turned intimacy into control performative spaces. So intimacy is no longer getting to know each other and building the bonding between each other, but it's where you perform and you act in order to get the attentions that you're looking for. Texting and messaging sounds more comfortable for young people than face-to-face conversation. So they are so active, they are very sociable on text and messages, but when it comes to face-to-face communications, they feel like they are hesitant and they don't feel enough confident to express themselves. Because in real life conversation or face-to-face conversation, it's when they have to expose the real self. So they feel vulnerable and not confident enough to interact with face-to-face conversations. So the modernizations of self-worth, and it's getting popular that young adults, they use social media as a medium to initiate and also develop romantic relationships. So not just for simple connections, but it's become the platform that they can initiate the romantic relationship as well. And it's during the early stages of a relationship, so participants in this study reported that they feel pressure to perform and to present idealized versions of themselves to the partners. So they inject themselves with something which is totally different in order to get the attraction or in order to initiate the relationship that they started in the first place. And in the study, many participants expressed that online communications made them more hesitant to engage in face-to-face interactions. Because again, when it's in online communication, you have time to perform, to set certain actions, but when it comes to face-to-face interactions, they feel like they are not ready because they don't have enough time to inject certain kind of images to other people. And what can be implied from this study is that it's the youth well-being is getting weaker, and the frequent use of digital communications like the social media that I mentioned earlier, it's used for maintaining friendship, which is the positive side, a good side. And I admit that it's getting better, that people can connect from different parts of the world, but it's also linked to loneliness and lower well-being, especially when teens use it to substitute in-person interactions. And adolescents often feel pressure to be constantly available in order to not miss out on important information, but FOMO leads to emotional burnout and surface-level connections. So it's very shallow. If teens choose performance over presence, it's not a deep connection, but it's shallow, because later on, the exposures of their real self will appear. And this leads to my ongoing study. Actually, this is an interpretive qualitative study, and the focus is on youth experiences in digital spaces. And unfortunately, I only got 10 participants because not many people between the age of 16 and 25 agree to have their interaction in online spaces to be observed. And it's very hard for me to find even these 10 participants. It did not take months, but years to gather only 10 participants, because of course you don't want other people to observe what you are doing on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok. Yes, and I also use open-ended surveys to explore emotional responses to social media use, to know how they shape their own identity and they shape their own emotions based on the use of social media. The analysis I used in vivo software and the identify patterns, it's not finished yet, but so far it's online identity constructions it's the most common themes because like young people between the age of 16 and 25, they express that they shape their own identity in online platforms more. So their identity in this sense is dynamic based on external validations. Emotional consequences of digital habits and the social dynamics mediated by screens. And screens here, it's refers to the activities that they spent on these 3 platforms that I mentioned earlier. Expected findings, I cannot say that this is the final findings because it's still ongoing, but these are the 5 points which I aim to answer and to seek the answer to the question is digital spaces shape identity through performance. And by performance, I mentioned earlier, it's the way that they perform based on external validations. And compulsive engagement leads to mental strain. Doom scrolling, this is the second point. Screen mediate, but also at the same time, screen also distort relationship between people. And the last 2 points is algorithmic ecosystem that I mentioned earlier, and how echo chambers affects youth's emotions and feeling management. The last one, that's it's quite ironic that you feel both empowered because they can show themselves on the platforms, they can show themselves to the world, they have more freedom to express themselves, but at the same time they feel trapped in the world of illusions and disillusionment. Okay. The implication and conclusions, I hope that the study leads to practical recommendations for not only youth, but parents and educators also have to watch out for what's going on in the world of social media. And it's also could be a good design and policy suggestions for healthier platforms. So maybe later on, policymakers do not see social media just a platform that people connect, but also a platform that people feel healthily connected to each other, mentally and also physically, yes, safe. That is all for the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the presentation. And the next speaker is Liam Mines, PhD researcher in social sciences and lecturer in criminology at the University of Northampton, UK.
Right. Can everyone? Yeah, there we go. Right. Hi, everyone. So yeah, my name is Liam. So what I'm going to be talking to you guys today is about my PhD research, which has explored young people living under this cost of living crisis. But as we go through the presentation, I'll obviously deconstruct what is actually meant by cost of living crisis, particularly in reference to the UK, which is where, of course, I'll situate my study. But we're going to be looking at the cost of living crisis and how young people experience this concept called ontological insecurity, which maybe a few of you may have heard of, maybe some of you not at all. But again, I'm going to run through that in this presentation. So the other thing I'm going to run through as well is some of my empirical primary data that obviously is Birmingham based to make sense of these experiences. Okay, so just a little bit about the research background then. So the first question is, how are young people in Birmingham impacted by the cost of living crisis? Which I appreciate sounds like a bit of a simplistic and quite a broad question. And the other question to ask as well is, do young people recognise that there's a cost of living crisis? And when I go through the data in a short while, hopefully, the answers to some of these questions we together might be able to sort of deconstruct and analyse. How do young people respond to this COLC? I'm going to abbreviate it to COLC, cost of living crisis, through actualizing a sense of community and demonstrating resilience and competencies. So actually, a lot of the themes that were explored earlier today in terms of how young people respond to particular issues, impacting them, this might dovetail with some of those other findings as well. So before we begin, let's ask 3 key questions. Why examine the COLC? Well, the cost of living crisis really represents an acceleration of living under poverty. We know that, poverty has always existed in some way, shape or form, even before events like, in Britain's context, the Industrial Revolution and the kind of emergence from serfdom to capitalism. So we know that the idea of poverty or inequality has always existed, but what the COLC really or could be seen to represent is that acceleration, and much of that acceleration can be attributed to processes such as globalization as well. Well, why Birmingham? Because I could have taken this study anywhere if I wanted to. Well, Birmingham's a very interesting place because, I don't know, has anyone ever been to Birmingham before? You have? Fantastic. Oh, okay. Well, so we've got someone who's been to Birmingham, and maybe some of you have, maybe some of you haven't, but Birmingham is it's the second largest city in the UK in terms of population size as well as, physical size. Interestingly as well, Birmingham actually holds one of the youngest demographics of population in Western Europe. So one of the questions I've been thinking about is, you've got a you've got a city with such a high youth population, and there's still such high rates of unemployment, of poverty. Birmingham also rates significantly high on multiple indices of deprivation. And so there's a bit of an inconsistency here, because you would traditionally think that a space full of young people, would have access to, labour markets and capital and all these types of things. You would expect the communities to be booming and thriving. Well, as we know from the data, that simply isn't the case. And of course, why young people? Why not focus on a different group? Because we recognise that the cost of living crisis impacts people from all ages, all generations, all cultures and all demographies. But young people we see as a particularly vulnerable social category, because we understand the ages of transition that young people are in. In a simplistic way, we understand young people to be in that transition between childhood and adulthood. Well, what does that even mean? Well, according to many people, it means moving from education into the labour markets. It means moving out of the family home into independent and secure living. And again, we know that increasingly this is becoming less and less common, not just in the UK, but of course over many parts of Europe, as we learned from some of the talks from earlier today. So I want to just go and talk a little bit more about the cost of living crisis, just for context, because I'm aware it's a very mediated term that some of us may apply into our thinking, but others may not. And again, language and discourse and local politics is important here. So as I said earlier, we know that poverty's always existed, but the COLC is something that can be attributed to that acceleration of experiences of living under poverty. And in the context of the UK, a lot of this kind of speaking of the COLC began when the Conservative formed a coalition with the Liberal Democrats in 2010. And from there, we saw a mass agenda of austerity politics that was largely in response to the 2008 financial crash, amongst other factors as well. And what austerity meant for communities in the UK was an absolute cutback of public essential services. Think about, public libraries where people can come and educate and socialise. Public swimming pools, leisure centres, sports facilities, all the things that you could say bring together the glue, think about people like Putnam, the glue and conditioning of communities. A lot of that has been decimated. But the cost of living crisis isn't just emboldened by austerity. It's also characterised by stagnant wages, a rising cost of living, and of course less disposable income as a result of the higher rates, of things like mortgages, interest rates, etc., etc. So whilst the colk is something that's heavily situated in the UK, it is commonly applied across global governing bodies. So if you read a lot of the consultation reports from the European Union, the United Nations, and the World Economic Forum, you will see this colk label applied continuously. So therefore, we can understand that maybe the colk is, it's nothing new. It's something that's always existed. And the other thing that makes the colk is when it's begun to impact the middle classes. When suddenly poverty isn't something that's owned by working class communities, now it's something owned by middle class groups as well. As you start to see, those mortgage rates increasing, less disposable income for leisure activities, etc., etc. So we see it as a very much a shared, but also a class-based problem. Now, I want to go now into the kind of concept of which I'm trying to create this sort of marriage, if you like, in terms of understanding this notion of ontological insecurity under the layerings of the colk, amongst other crises as well. So the term ontological insecurity, really began from around the 1960s. If anyone's ever read people like Lang's work, who talked about schizophrenia, it began as a term to identify people with schizophrenia and to say they're different from mainstream society or the rest of us because they have this kind of inhabitual sort of insecurity that drives paranoia and all this kind of stuff. Well, that's all very well and good, but these ideas in the early wave were not placed under structural conditioning. It was very much about pathologization. So people a lot of these people come from a kind of late modern school of thought, people like Anthony Giddens and Jock Young. They wanted to reorient the gaze on ontological insecurity to say that yes, there is a rise of people who have a perpetual sense of insecurity within the self, but we can locate a lot of this between the rise of things like consumer capitalism, globalization, all the things that have kind of, you could say, have disrupted a stable and a prosperous way of life, can then place ontological insecurity into the foreground. So therefore, at this point, we're going beyond mere consciousness and identity. We're now putting these ideas into the map of structures and institutions. The structure versus agency debate, as we also touched upon throughout the day. What role do structures and structuring processes play on the agency of people, in this case, of young people? And I'll go as far as to say as well, that ontological insecurity isn't something that is held by a minority of people. It's held pretty much, I would say, by all of us to some extent, because to demonstrate ontological insecurity could be like what we've learned from the talks earlier today. The young people who do not want to engage face to face, the young people who retreat into the social media space, and the young people who fear they're missing out and they're losing this sense of cultural relevance because of what's going on around them. So maybe things like this could maybe be understood as well through this lens. I'm not going to go into all this too much because I'm aware it's quite dense. But the other person whose work we draw upon is Zygmunt Bauman, who, in terms of, obviously Bauman didn't initiate the term ontological insecurity, that came from Giddens. But what Bauman's work around liquid modernity, which is this idea that social structures have completely dissipated and now things are running under a much more of a heightened sense of risk and insecurity, this is where we can start to gain a sense of how it looks on the ground. So you could see this, if you like, as a almost theoretical sort of marriage. And then, of course, we look at the continuity of self-identity that's bound in this routine and structure within the everyday. So these sorts of theoretical works, I think, will be useful when we start to foreground the data, which will come shortly. So in terms of the data, I did 24 semi-structured interviews with young people and youth workers. 19 of those were young people, and 5 of those, if my maths is right, 5 of those were youth workers. I wanted to get the youth worker perspectives because these are people who work day in, day out with young people, and in many senses, they're like another parent to many of these young people. You know, they interact with them on the daily, so having their insights, I thought, would be invaluable to this project. Not only did I collect interviews, I also did a participant observation study, which enabled me to immerse myself into the space, which was 2 Birmingham-based youth centres, and to actually understand and observe the kind of, not just the habitus of the space, but the interactions and the encounters that happen within it. And again, when we go through the data, you'll see a mixture of interview data and field observation notes that I took at the time. Okay, so here are some of the key social issues under the Kolk. So through a thematic qualitative analysis, these were some of the things that started to come through in the data sets. The first one was identity. Overwhelmingly, a lot of young people felt a detachment from their sense of identity. They felt a bit lost because they felt loyal to their communities in one respect, but in the other respect, they felt they had to move outside of their communities in order to gain a better life. A lot of young people were talking about moving to places like Dubai, or at least showing aspirations to move to countries like Dubai. And again, I think a lot of that has a level of influence from social media as well. And of course, this is where we start to see the problems like anxiety, insecurity, and this is where I foregrounded the concepts of ontological insecurity and risk. The next one is political detachment. I always raise an eyebrow whenever people act surprised that young people are not engaged politically. Well, to me, it's simple. What does politics offer these young people? What does the state offer these young people? You know, we live in an increasing neoliberal, anti-statist, groups of societies where it's all about, individual responsibility. The state has absolutely no role or no say in safeguarding you. So, of course, that leverage of social contract between the citizen and the state has been completely eroded. So, of course, there's going to be a level of detachment, and not to mention a lack of representation as well. Food insecurity, very literal, and again, you'll see this when I go through the data in a moment. A lot of the young people expressed food insecurity and not knowing where the next meal would come from. Elements like that will dovetail with a more perpetual sense of ontological insecurity, it can be argued. And dovetailing with food insecurity is housing insecurity as well. Not knowing if they can ever move out of their parents' home, not knowing if they can access their own standard of living one day. And increasingly, this is where we can see a lot of young people situating themselves. And again, it might also dovetail with some of the earlier conversations today about low birth rates and fertility rates and all these kinds of things. I think there's definitely a link there. Now, as well, the next one is about possessing disabilities or caring for family members with disabilities. Now, young people with or caring for those with disabilities wasn't part of my sample, but it just happened by, I guess, pure coincidence that a lot of my participants fell into this category. And as a result of that, I thought this has to be situated as well, because going back to my conversations earlier about anti-statism, there wasn't much support at all, at least from the British context, to support those with disabilities. So a lot of young people resumed the role of carers for their parents or for their, loved ones. Because they couldn't have anyone in to look after them. And of course, I've already touched upon this, aspirations to leave the UK. Now, this, of course, if it happens on an exponential scale, could lead to more problems like brain drain and, of course, a rising ageing population population as well. So it's definitely something to think about. Okay, so I put on here, sorry, I'm yelling into it. I've put on here one of the quotes, and just for the benefit of everyone in the room, I'm just going to read it out. So this was an interview with a young person, and they said, "So I don't think it's ever going to get equal. And honestly, no one should have to struggle to feed their kids and put a roof over their heads. Like, I know loads of people who I was speaking to. Everyone is getting affected, and even people with jobs like a fire brigade person. I was talking to him, and he was at the food bank, and he makes this much money." And I remember he went like this to say, "this much money." He was saying about the cost of living is so erratic that going to the food bank helped him. It just goes to show that even people like him who are making money are getting affected. It's a real thing, so ... So what I kind of gained a sense of from this was that, you know, the young people growing up, they're seeing the cost of living crisis affecting people outside of their kind of community, so to speak. People who, you know, like people who work in the fire service, very respectable, very noble jobs, that you would traditionally think, you know, they earn, you know, obviously not millionaires or anything, but they earn suitable money. Well, he's observing someone in the fire brigade going to a food bank, when we know that before austerity politics in 2010, food banks were really a thing for the homeless and for the very, very destitute. But now we're seeing people, and it goes into what I said earlier about that merging of class structures as well. We're seeing those people accessing food banks. So what impression is that going to give to the young person that they can ascertain a sense of security and a sense of prosperity for their future? I'm aware of time, so I'm going to speed it up a little bit. And then this is the next one. This is what I wrote in my field notes, and I said, "Tonight I spoke with the youth worker about a cluster of things, including young people's access to food during the school and college half-term period. She made pasta for the young people, and when the young people were offered individually, they didn't express a keen interest to take it up. However, when the youth workers ate with the young people and laid out the food collectively for everyone, the uptake was significantly high. Tonight, all young people were offered food and numerous declined. I asked the young people if they had eaten dinner earlier that evening or had plans to eat dinner when they reached home, and in response, many shrugged with uncertainty." So, in that night alone, what I saw was a group of young people who, they all had a shared issue. Because all of them individually confessed to me, you know, in the sanctuary of, you know, me and them, that they were unsure if they were going to be able to eat when they got home. But despite that mutuality of circumstance, they very much in a group, they didn't want to be seen to be given, you know, charity or aid or anything like that. And I think this dovetails with another increasing body of work that talks about stigma and shame. If anyone's ever read Imogen Tyler's work, Stigma, it talks about this almost identically, and I really recommend it. It's a brilliant book. But things like this, you could say, attribute to this sense of ontological insecurity, because what it means to be ontologically insecure, according to people like Giddens, is not knowing where the future's going to take you, not knowing how things are going to pan out. And I've got 5 seconds, so I'm going to have to really sprint this up. But the final thing I'll say is that moving forward, how can we enable a sense of security? It might be through an abandonment of austerity politics and moving more towards a collective sort of approach. And things like this, what I've got on the screen here, are good examples of that, in terms of enabling warm spaces, food banks, but we need to do more than that. So I'm going to leave it there because I'm aware of time, but if anyone wants to follow up with this later or at dinner or whenever, then I'll be more than happy to have a chat. And yeah, thank you very much, and here are the references as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Liam. And the last presentation of today will be delivered by Epsilandri Septiarini, PhD candidate from Indonesia. Please, the stage is yours.
All right, I will make it fast because the unlimited time. First of all, I would like to say thank you for all the committee, Katrina and David, for this wonderful opportunity to me, and especially for the previous presenters for your insightful contribution. So it is truly an honor to me to be the final speakers today. And before I begin, let me say this, because I came here not just with a PowerPoint, but with a voice. A voice I carry on behalf of many young people in my region. So my presentation is about navigating through uncertainty, evaluating the impact of the gig economy on youth employment and the policy needs in Southeast Asia. You can see the visual there. And let me begin by showing you where I come from. This is Indonesia, ladies and gentlemen, a vast and diverse country. And right there in the heart of the Java Island is my city, Yogyakarta. And I am Epsilandri Septiarini, a lecturer from Universitas Sarjana Wiyata Taman Siswa, university inspired by the visions of Ki Hajar Dewantara, the father of educations in Indonesia, who believed that learning must be rooted in compassion, freedom, and purpose. So from that small city, I flew over 17 hours to be here with all of you in Hungary, not just to present research, but to carry a message. And a message about the reality that many young people live today between digital opportunities and economic uncertainty, because, between dreams and survival. So now let's look at the bigger picture of how this reality unfolds, not just in Indonesia, but across in our regions. Let's start from my home, Indonesia, a country of more than 270 million people, with the majority still working in informal sectors. Yes, so many young people here, the gig economy is not a choice, it's a lifeline, ladies and gentlemen. But Indonesia is not alone. Across the Southeast Asia, in the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, we see the same story unfolding. Young people turning to platform-based work, seeking income, but often without any protections. And now, yes, we are now in Hungary, a different continent, a different context, but perhaps not so different after all. Because in today's digital world, the challenges of youth employment, job precarity, and the future of work, they cross borders. So that's why I'm glad to bring this topic here, so we can learn, reflect, and find the better answer together. So, okay, why talk about this topic, ladies and gentlemen? I choose this topic because I see how many young people are struggling. Some of my students work as drivers, food deliver, online freelancer, streamers in TikTok or Shopee, in Instagram, not for fun, but just for survive. That's ironic, yes. And the gig economy gives them freedom, of course, yes, freedom, but also stress and uncertainty. And I wanted to understand this better, not just in theory, but from their real experience. And because as a lecturer and researchers, I feel a responsibility to understand what they're going through. Not just in theory, but in practice, ladies and gentlemen. So I wanted to explore the two things, how the young people today view their future, like the presenters mentioned before. What does gig work give them, and what does it take away? So this research is my way to amplifying their voices. These are not just numbers, but these are real lives with dreams, doubts, and daily struggles. And before we zoom out to the Asia, okay. And before we zoom out to the Southeast Asia, let's begin with a closer look at my country. In 2024, we have over 68.5 million youth aged 15 to 34, but 13% of youth aged 15 to 24 are unemployed. And among those who do work, 59% are in informal jobs with no security. So that's why we are seeing a rapid shift. Young people are turning to ride-hailing, online freelancing, digital content creations, and small e-commerce gigs. And they are not just chasing opportunity, they're just escaping precarity. So this reflects the core paradox of the gigs economy, freedom, but also deep vulnerability. Now let's turn to the broader Southeast Asian context. But this is not, once again, this is not about in Indonesia. Across the Southeast Asia with the similar things, a story unfolding. In the Philippines, gig works accounts for over 22% of the workforce, most under 30. And in Thailand, nearly 80% of gig workers report unstable income. And Vietnam, over 68% of workers are in informal jobs. So the digital shift is accelerating across the region, so it's the rise of the platform-based work. And it's clear, Southeast Asia is young and connected, and increasingly dependent on gig work as a survival strategy. Right. Let's comparative reflections at the regions. Youth employment or underemployment remains a pressing issue across the Southeast Asia. With limited access to stable formal jobs, so many young people turn to gig or informal work as their main source of income. And while this gives some flexibility, most gig roles come with no legal security, no health insurance, no health protections, and no long-term stability. As young people are working hard, but often without a safety net. This is not just a labor trend, ladies and gentlemen. It is a generational experience, one that deserves urgent policy attention. Now, I'd like to briefly explain the research behind this study. Right. So my focus is on how the gig economy affects youth employment in Southeast Asia, especially in Indonesia, in the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. Yes. And I look at three main aspects: job security, income stability, and how young people experience working on digital platform. So this study uses sequential mixed method approach. Yeah. In the first page, you can see there on the screen, I use qualitative and exploratory method. I analyze reports and statistic data from the International Labour Organization, World Bank, Asian, and national government to build a basic understanding. And the second page, which I'm currently preparing, I will conduct quantitative survey for 400 young people aged 18 to 35 who work in gig jobs in urban areas. And I also plan to do 40 in-depth interview, 10 in each country to understand their experience, daily and personal stories. And for both pages, I use purposive sampling, focuses on youth who are already involved in platform-based work. So to ensure quality, I will also test the survey to validity and reliability using SPSS. And then to support this research, I use two frameworks. First, precarious work theory, and which help explain how instability and lack of protection shape informal jobs. And the second one is a comparative digital labor framework. To look what? To look at things like a social protection, income stability, and how platform control work through algorithm. By combining both qualitative and quantitative methods, I hope to capture both of the numbers and the real voices behind them. So after exploring the methods and framework behind this study, this brings me to the question, why this matter? Why this research matter? So for me, this study is important, ladies and gentlemen, because it fills a gap. Not many studies focus on young gig workers in Southeast Asia. And I used both survey and interviews to get a full picture of the members and the real stories. So I also give practical ideas for how governments can support young people to be better. So what do young people really face on the ground? Let's look at what I call it the gig paradox. So many young people are drawn to gig work because of its promises: freedom, flexible hours, being your own boss. They say that. They see is a path to independence, quick income, and digital opportunity, right? But the reality is more complex, ladies and gentlemen. It's not easy and often more painful. Globally, less than 10% of gig workers have access to any form of social protections. But in the Southeast Asia, the number is even lower, below 5%. So their income, visibility, and their performance are often controlled by algorithm. Once again, controlled by algorithm, not by people, not by fairness, but by code. So here's I call the gig paradox: what young workers are promised versus what they actually experience. And we see the paradox unfold every day. From freelancer juggling inconsistent projects to live streaming seller on platform like TikTok, Shopee, what else? Instagram, yeah. Stay online until 3 or 4 a.m. every day. That's ridiculous, right? Not because they want to, no, but because the algorithm demand it. The work without contracts. They work without benefit and with no certainty, but constant pressure to perform. But with intense pressure to perform in front of an audience and for a system they cannot control. This is the price of so-called flexibility. It gives freedom, but strips away from protections. These are not isolated stories, they are patterns. And they tell us that the labor market is evolving, but not necessarily in the direction of equity of care. And so while the platform grow and the people powering them, especially youth, remain unprotected, unseen, and unheard. Right. And then we next to the next slide. From precarity to protection, rethinking youth work. The gig economy may be flawed, but it's also an opportunity, ladies and gentlemen. Especially for youth in rural or underserved areas, platforms are often the first entry point into the labor market. We cannot deny the value of the flexibility, but the flexibility means little without protection. So, what we can do? International labor studies recommend several strategies for this. The first one, you can see on the screen, create social safety nets, tailored to gig workers. And the second one is develop portable benefits like health insurance or pensions that follow the worker, not the employer, also with the worker. The third one is invest in digital skill programs so that young people can move beyond survival gigs into sustainable livelihoods. Yes, and the next one is ensure algorithm fairness and give workers a voice in how this platform operate. And most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, include youth voices in the policies that shape their future. Because the future of work should not just be efficient. It should be dignified, inclusive, and fair. The challenge is not just economic, it's also political, structural, and deeply human. So once again, I want to tell you about this. These are not just numbers. They are lives. The young people are lives. They are voices. And this is my small voice for a large cause. And I hope it sparks a bigger conversation and even bigger change. Thank you for giving me space to be here. My name is Landry. Thank you from Yogyakarta, Indonesia.
Thank you, and thanks for all of you for spending the afternoon with us, learning from and providing a platform for young researchers in order to understand the youth better. To close our conference today, I would like to ask the Director of Youth Research Institute, Dr. Levente Székely, to take the stage and deliver his closing remarks.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu once said, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." There is no question, he was right. The Youth Research Institute has been around for over 3 years, and we are already organizing our second Emerging Voices conference. When we decided at the end of 2023 to organize a conference where young scientists could present the results of their research, we were not yet thinking of a conference series. Today, however, we are. I'm pleased to announce that we will be organizing Emerging Voices 2.0 next year. We believe that Emerging Voices provides an excellent opportunity for young researchers focusing on youth to introduce themselves. We know that the first steps in an academic career are crucial. We are experiencing a growing interest. We received many more excellent abstracts for this year's conference than last year, from which we selected the best. So you are all winners. Thank you for your high quality presentations, and we look forward to receiving your manuscripts for young youth and generation studies. We have decided to award 2 prizes at this year's Emerging Voices. One for the best abstract and one for the best presentation. Based on the decision to the organizing committee, the award for the best abstract goes to Liam Miles. Congratulations. And the award for the best presentation goes to Melly Kang. Congratulations. And last but not least, I would like to thank everyone for their participation and the audience for their attention during the entire day. I think next year we should also give a prize to the audience. Many thanks to everyone.